Morning. Today's daf is Yevamot Daf Pei Aleph. We are at the Mishnah near the top of Pei Aleph, and we'll jump right in with that Mishnah. So Sris Chama Kohen Shenasa Bas Yisrael. You have this Kohen who is a Sris Chama. As a reminder, a Sris Chama is somebody who is naturally impotent from birth, not through some outside cause. And so this person is both a Kohen and impotent, and now he marries Shenasa Bas Yisrael. He marries a daughter of Israel, meaning that he marries somebody who's not a daughter of a Kohen. So Machila the Truma, she is allowed to eat Truma. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon Omrim. So we're going to have 5 different rules. Not clear whether or not each of these rules conflict with one another. That'll be hopefully something that we'll cover in the Gemara, although I haven't been through the entire Gemara. But we'll see exactly how they, some of them at least, relate to one another. So Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon Omrim, they add androgynous Kohen Shenasa Bas Yisrael. If you have somebody who has both male and female reproductive organs, so they have characteristics of both. So, and that person marries a daughter of Israel, somebody who is not a Bas Kohen. Again, they say Machila b'Truma. She's allowed to eat Truma. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda says, what about the Tumtum category? Tumtum shenikra v'nimtza zachar. If a Tumtum is a somebody whose private parts are covered, and as a result, with a level layer of skin, and as a result, one is unable to determine whether or not the person is male or female. And then the skin is torn open, and we see underneath the person is in fact male. Lo yachalos, that person is considered impotent, and as a result, as we saw, and naturally so, and as a result, as we saw according to Rabbi Akiva in the last Mishnah, that person is not allowed to do chalitza. Because he is like a saris, like somebody who is impotent. Androgynous, no say. And again, somebody with male and female organs is allowed to marry a woman. Aval lo nisa, he's not allowed to, or the androgynous is not allowed, they are not allowed to be taken as in marriage as effectively a female. So even though the androgynous has female characteristics as well as male characteristics, they can only take somebody in marriage. They cannot be taken in marriage. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, androgynous chayav ben alav skila kazachar. That if one has relations with an androgynous and one is male, well then that is like having mishkavei zachar, like having male to male sexual relations, and that is liable for skila, for stoning, as reflected in the Torah. Okay, so now we've got this Mishnah with these 5 rules, and so the Gemara begins with the one in some ways is an obvious question, which is, isn't this obvious? Of course, somebody who marries a Kohen is able to eat truma. So pshita, isn't that obvious? No, it is not. I might have thought that because this person is impotent, I might have thought that when is it that a Kohen can enable his wife to eat? It's only when he can father children. After all, if in fact the husband dies and they don't have children, well, then she's no longer allowed to eat truma. And so maybe you need to have the possibility of having children, which would continue to allow her to eat truma even after the husband passes away. Kamash Milan, not so. We don't actually need that. We actually say that even somebody who is impotent can, if they're a Kohen, they can enable their wife to eat truma. Okay, so now we get to Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon, Omrim, androgynous. So again, we had in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Shimon said that somebody who has male and female organs, that they are they also enable the wife to eat truma. And so, and now I will note we're about to get into a discussion and a disagreement among Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan about the level of obligation of truma today. We will see that Reish Lakish says that there's only a rabbinic obligation for truma today, and Rabbi Yochanan says no, it's even biblical. But in doing that, it's worth noting that there is a debate among Rashi and Tosfos on one hand. Rashi and Tosfos say that the only things that are biblically obligated in truma are grains, grapes, and olives for olive oil, while all other fruit and produce are only truma rabbinically. Rambam, however, has a broader definition of biblically obligated truma that would include other fruit, but not vegetables. So everybody agrees vegetables not biblically required to give truma, but we have a rabbinic obligation, and then everybody agrees that grains, grapes, and olives is biblical originally. And the question that we're going to see in a moment is what's the status of it today. So in any event, the Kohen is enabling the married his wife to eat truma, even though that Kohen is an androgynous, has both male and female qualities. So Amar Reish Lakish ma'achila b'truma ve'ein ma'achila b'chazeh b'shok. That when we say that she can eat truma, we're being clear about it, that she's not allowed to eat a chazeh, the breast, or the shok, the thigh. Those are the pieces of the korban shlamim that the Kohen Gadol, that the Kohanim received from a korban that any average Jew brings to celebrate various good things. So they get that piece of that of every korban that the Israelites bring, and so that piece of that korban is kachim. It's kachim kalim. And as a result, what Reish Lakish is saying is that is not covered. That from that biblical kind of perspective, we will not allow an androgynous to enable his wife to eat that. Rabbi Yochanan says no. You can even allow the wife to eat this breast and the thigh that are kachim kalim. Why is the breast and thigh different? It's different because it's biblically required. It's and biblically prohibited for non-Kohanim. Well, one second. Truma nami doraisa. Well, one second. Truma is also biblically prohibited for non-Kohanim. So that doesn't tell us any different. So no, we got to be careful with what we're saying. The truma is manazed the rabbanan. The point is that Reish Lakish is saying that truma today is only a rabbinic requirement. There is no biblical requirement to give truma, and as a result, when we only have something that's rabbinically potentially, again, the point is that because it's only a rabbinic obligation to give the truma does not constitute something that is prohibited biblically to anyone. And so as a result, we can be lenient in this uncertain situation because what's the uncertainty? We're uncertain whether on some level this androgynous is male or female. So we'll say suffik the rabbanan lahakel, where we'll be lenient in connection with a rabbinic obligation, and we'll say that because maybe the androgynous is male, and so therefore his wife is in fact a wife, and therefore able to eat truma, so therefore we'll allow him to eat the rabbinically obligated truma today. But what would the law be according to Reish Lakish if the Beis Hamikdash were standing? So then, the wife would not be able to eat any truma. Because I've said because we learned that he's not going to allow her to eat the breast and the thigh. So liflog litne b'dida. Well, 1 second. Why didn't Reish Lakish specifically argue about that itself? Why did he need to specifically talk about the breast and the thigh? Let him say that truma itself would be a problem. So b'med dvarim imurim, say that he should say that. When are we saying that this is true, that the androgynous can allow his wife to eat truma? But truma d'Rabbanan, but truma d'oraisa lo. But he would say that with truma d'oraisa, when it was biblically obligated to give truma, you would not be able to. The wife of the androgynous would not be able to eat the truma. Why not say that? Why did he instead say that he could eat that she could eat the truma, but she could not eat the chazav v'shok? So hachinami kamar, actually, really, that was what he was trying to say. Kishahu machila. When is it that she when he feeds her? Machila betruma bisman hazeh d'Rabbanan. He can only feed her with truma in today because it's all rabbinic. Machila bisman chazeh v'shok. He could not actually feed her during the time when people could eat the breast and thigh. Why? Because at the time that people would eat the breast and thigh, then truma would be a biblical obligation. And even at that time, you would not be able to eat. When the Beis Hamikdash was standing, even at that time, a rabbinic truma would not be even allowed for this wife, because maybe she will come to eat truma d'oraisa. But after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, when truma d'oraisa is no longer even a theoretical possibility, because there's no more the possibility of truma d'oraisa, according to Reish Lakish, well, then there would be no reason for the rabbis to impose a decree that says that they can't, that the wife can't eat truma d'Rabbanan, because and will allow her to eat it because it's only rabbinic, and we have this uncertainty, and in the case of uncertainty, will allow a rabbinic situation to proceed. So, all right, so now we've got the basics understanding of Reish Lakish's position for Rabbi Yochanan Amar. What about Rabbi Yochanan? What's his position? So he said, Af machila b'chazav v'shok, that we even allow the wife to eat the breast and the thigh. Amar le Rabbi Yochanan le Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan would say to Reish Lakish, Mi savra truma bisman hazeh d'Rabbanan. Do you really think that truma today is only rabbinic? Because what gives you the basis to say that? So Amar le, yes, in fact, I believe that today it's only rabbinic. Sha'ani shoneh igul be'igulim oleh, that I have learned that if you have a group of round cake pressed figs, so that are truma, and they become mixed with other round cakes of pressed figs, then it becomes, then they can become batal. They can become nullified, and all of them can be permitted. Now, the problem is, as Rashi helps us understand here, the problem is that if truma were today a biblical requirement, well, then, because round cakes of pressed figs are something that's sufficiently important that they would be counted when sold, it's a davarship minyan, and this is introducing this concept of certain categories of things. We have this general principle, right, that minority pieces of something larger can be nullified. So often, for example, we will say that if there's a drop of milk in a big vat of soup, of chicken soup, we'll say that the milk is nullified 1 to 60. That if you have 60 pieces of 60 amounts of chicken soup relative to the amount of the milk, so then we'll nullify the milk in connection with the chicken soup, and we'll pretend that the milk does not exist. Now, that nullification process has certain exceptions. And one of the exceptions is if something is so important that it is something that is counted, well, then we would not apply that nullification. And so the fact that Reish Lakish has learned a brisa that we'll eventually cite that says that a round cake of pressed figs can be nullified, that shows that a rabbinic nullification, that it must be only rabbinic. Because if it were biblical, well, then we would not allow the nullification process to happen, because the item is something that's counted. And when you have something that's counted, a biblical nullification can't happen. So Amar Le, so Rabbi Yochanan responded to Reish Lakish's proof and says, no, I've got another case where we have something that is sometimes counted, namely pieces of meat. And in that situation, we allow the piece of meat to be nullified. We had a slice of tamei chatas meat, and it was mixed with slices of tahor chatas meat, and it all became, and the tamei piece became nullified. So that shows that even when we have biblically prohibited foods, and they are sometimes sold by number, so that shows that your principle is not right, that in fact the pressed figs could be a biblical case, and it's just a situation that we allow the nullification despite the fact that it's something that's counted. Because savrad kol shedarko limanot shaninu, because do you think that, well, and we'll cite this Mishnah shortly, that we're saying everything that's counted is something that's significant? No, that wasn't what the Mishnah was supposed to have said. It was supposed to say et shedarko limanot shaninu. Only things that are always counted are something that's subject to nullification. And so as a result, when Reish Lakish gave his example of pressed figs, that is not something that is exclusively counted. And so as a result, nullification would be possible, even if it were biblically required truma. And so as a result, Rabbi Yochanan says, your proof is not a good one. So Maihi, what was this Mishnah that Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan are arguing about? Ditanan, we learn this Mishnah, it's in Orla. Misha hayulo chavile siltan shall clay hakerem. If you have this tilton, this which is often translated as fenugreek. Rashi translates it here and elsewhere as either a spice or a legume. But in any event, the point is that we have this item, and it was grown with nearby a vineyard. And so as a result, it is a problem due to the concept of kloyim. We're not allowed to grow other fruits and vegetables within a certain distance of a vineyard. And so as a result, yedalku, it needs to be burned. What happens in this arhu ba'acherus if it gets mixed up with other bundles of fenugreek? And so as a result, you can't tell where it is. So now we turn to pay aleph on the bet. So kulan yedalku, they all need to be burned. Divrei Rebbe Meir, that's Rebbe Meir's view. There's not a possibility of bittul. No, if there are 201 times the amount of the prohibited stuff, well, then you're allowed to, it can be nullified. Shahaya Rebbe Meir Omer, Kol Shedarko Limano Mekadesh, because Rebbe Meir said anything Shedarko Limanos. Now again, that language, Kol Shedarko Limanos, that was the way that Reish Lakish wanted to read the Mishnah. That would be anything that is sometimes counted, that is regularly counted, not always counted. No, there are only 6 things that are always counted and therefore never going to be bittul. Rabbi Akiva Omer Shiva, and Rabbi Akiva says no, it's not 6, it's 7. Eluhain. So what are the 6? Egozi ferech, these perech nuts. Virimone vadan, these badan pomegranates. They're really like chashuv and important things, and so as a result, they are not going to be nullified even in large groups. Chavios stumos, you got sealed casks of wine. Again, all these things are sufficiently important. The chilfei trudin, you got beet stalks. Kolche kruv, cabbage stalks. udlas Yavanis, some kind of Greek gourd, and Rabbi Akiva Mosif af kikaros shel balabais, even homemade bread. Haru'uyin la'arla. All these things can be orla, and meaning that if it's within the first 3 years of their growth, so then they're prohibited. And as a result, if they get mixed in with other things, it's going to be problematic. And they can also be subject l'chil'ei kakerim. They can also be subject to klayim of a vineyard. Kilei kerem, Rabbi Yochanan, and so I'm sorry. Haru'uyan la'orla orla the kilei kerem. That anything that could be subject to orla of those items can in fact be considered prohibited as a result of orla, meaning if it's within the first 3 years, and any of those things which are grown near a vineyard will become kilayim of a vineyard and actually become prohibited for that reason. And again, if there are any of those things are even mixed with hundreds of others or even thousands of others, it will be all of them become problematic because these items are never nullified. Rabbi Yochanan Savar. So now again, Rabbi Yochanan, back to our disagreement about those words, Kol Shadarko Limano Mekadesh. So Rabbi Yochanan Savar Es Shadarko Limano Shaninu. It wasn't that they were, the language of this Mishnah was not Kol Shadarko Limanos, but rather Es Shadarko Limanos. Those things that are counted, meaning that they're always counted. And unlike Kol Shadarko Limanos, which is just things that are regularly counted, sometimes counted. So that's a very big difference. Rabbi Yochanan says that for Rabbi Meir, the things that are excluded from bittul, from nullification, are things that are always counted, whereas Reish Lakish said, no, it's things that are even sometimes counted. The Reish Lakish Savar, Kol Shadar Limano Shanino. Again, the language that we had when we read the Mishnah itself, that was what Reish Lakish thought the Mishnah actually said, namely that things that are sometimes counted. So now, let's go back. So that was the main argument between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan about the extent to which we say nullification of things that were counted. Now, Rabbi Yochanan responded when Reish Lakish referenced the case of the pressed figs. Rabbi Yochanan responded with a case of a piece of meat, specifically a piece of tamei chatas meat that got mixed up with tahor chatas meat. And we said, according to what Rabbi Yochanan said, that there was a citation to say that mixture all became permitted, and we treat it all as tahor, not tamei. And so that showed that even something that is potentially counted could be nullified. So what was that teaching? What was the teaching that Rabbi Yochanan referenced that was talking about a piece of meat? The Tanya chaticha shel chatas tameya. We have a brisa that says that if you have a piece of chatas meat that is tamei, shenis arva b'meya chatichot shel chataot tahorot, that now gets mixed up with 100 slices of chatas meat that are tahor. V'chein perusa shel lechem hapanim tameya. Or you have a piece of the lechem hapanim, the showbread that was in front of that was put on the shulchan in the Beis Hamikdash every Shabbos, and it went from Shabbos to Shabbos, and that bread, and you have a piece of that is tamei and therefore can't be eaten. Shenis arva b'meya pruso shel lechem hapanim tahoros, that gets mixed up with 100 pieces that are tahor. Taleh, it becomes nullified. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer lo taleh, and Rabbi Yehuda says it's not nullified. So this is the teaching that Rabbi Yochanan says shows that something that is counted, namely a piece of meat that is not, it's not always counted, but at least it's regularly counted, shows that it can become nullified. So aval chaticha shel chatas tahora. Now the brisa continues. Now this is going to be less important for us for right now, but we're going to go through this brisa in more detail as we go through today. We're going to go a little bit further into tomorrow's daf because unfortunately Eli's not available over Shabbos, so this way he'll be able to catch up between today's learning and Sunday's learning. Will be able to make up tomorrow's daf. So aval chaticha shel chatas tahora. Now we have, what about if you have a slice of a chatas that is tahor? Shenis arva b'mei chaticha shel chulin tahoros. Now it gets mixed up with 100 pieces of chulin that are tahor. So can a non-kohen eat that mixture because it's 100 to 1? V'chein prusa shel lechem hapanim tahora shenis arva b'mei prusa shel chulin tahoros. What about if you have a one piece of lechem hapanim that is tahor that becomes mixed up with 100 pieces of chulin that are tahor? Divrei hakol lo taleh. Everybody agrees that it does not become nullified, and so as a result, a kohen would need to eat the mixture, and you'd have to just sell the whole thing. Rashi says you sell the whole thing to a kohen. So katani mias reishatala. Now again, the beginning of this brisa says that the things all become nullified. So how do we understand Reish Lakish? Reish Lakish was saying that something that is counted can't be nullified. So, but here we see that we have something not that can't be counted, that is something that is regularly counted, that's important enough that you regularly count. And pieces of meat are things that are regularly counted. So how could Reish Lakish understand this brisa? This brisa seems to be inconsistent with his position. And of course, Reish Lakish is an Amora. He can't argue with a Tana. So Amar Rebbe Chia Braid the Rav Huna b'nimocha. So we're going to explain this answer that this is talking about a situation where it was dissolved, meaning that the piece of meat that got mixed up, the tameh piece of meat that got mixed up with the tar piece of meat, fully dissolved. If you cook a piece of meat long enough, it sort of like falls apart. And that's what we're talking about. There's no meat left to point to. So it's no longer something that is counted. And that's why it can become nullified, because it is not anything that's counted any longer. So ihachi, my time of Rebbe Yehuda. Well, one second. If you're going to give that as the answer, well, then why does Rebbe Yehuda say that in the brisa that it's not nullified? We need to explain. We need to understand how he could say that. So turning to Pei Bet Amud Aleph, we say Rebbe Yehuda l'taimei. Rebbe Yehuda goes according to his reasoning to Amar min b'mino lo batal, because he says that when you have two things that are the same item, same thing, same so two pieces of meat, two pieces, one chicken soup that's kosher with chicken soup that's not kosher. So when you have two things that are the exact same and those items get mixed together, then we say that can never be nullified. And that's based on the idea that that you don't have the idea of nullification, according to Rebbe Yehuda, is when you have milk in chicken soup. Then you don't taste the milk anymore, so we can pretend that the milk is no longer there. On the other hand, when you have one chicken soup mixed with another chicken soup, Rebbe Yehuda says you've got plenty of taste of chicken soup. And so as a result, that even though you might not be able to tell which chicken soup you're tasting, whether it's the kosher chicken soup or the non-kosher chicken soup, it's all there. It's all the same taste. So as a result, in that situation, he says you can't nullify it. So now we understand that's why this the piece of meat that is tamei chatas can't be nullified among the tahor chatas, because it's all the same kind of meat, and so as a result, that is min b'mino and therefore not nullified. So avaloni moach mai. So what would the law be if it had not dissolved? Lo taleh, right? According to Reish Lakish, in this brisa, if it had not been nullified, well, then it would not be if it had not been, if it had not melted, if it had not melted away, well, then it would no longer be nullified because it would be something that would be counted. Well, then let's take a look at the rest of that brisa. Remember, the rest of the brisa talked about adatani aval chaticha shel chatas tahoros shenisarva b'mea chatichos shel chulin tahoros lo tala. Why did the brisa need to give an example when it was trying to give an example of something that does not become nullified? Why did it give an example of a slice of chatas that is tahor mixed with 100 slices of chulin that are tahor? Niflag v'nisne b'dida. It could have taught a case similar to the first case, meaning the first case was talking about a piece of chatas that is tameh mixed with a chatas that is tahor, but it was all dissolved. So just say that the case where we don't do nullification is a case where where the pieces did not dissolve, and that would be why you didn't nullify it. Why did you have to come and talk about a case of the chatas that's tahor mixed with slices of chulin that are tahor? So b'med dvar mamurim b'shemini mocha, right? Because what could we have said? We could have said that when did we say in our first case that there is a nullification? It's when it all dissolved. About loni mocha lo tala, but when it doesn't dissolve, it doesn't become nullified. So why didn't we just say that? That would have been a much simpler lesson. So tahoros b'tahoros adifle. So the Gemara answers and we'll explain it as Rashi understands it, that when you have one piece of tahor mixed with another piece of tahor, that maximizes the likelihood of nullification. And yet, we're going to see, as we saw, as the Brisa mentioned, in that case, despite the fact that tahor b'tahor is often a more likely situation of nullification, in this instance, it is not an instance of nullification. When we have the tahor chatas with the tahor chulin, we say no, there's no nullification there, and we wanted to highlight that lesson, and that's why we didn't just talk about a situation where the meat did not dissolve. Reish Lakish, Maishna Reisha, Umaishna Seifa. Well, 1 second. What's the difference between the first case and the latter case? Meaning, why is it that in the case of the tahor chatas mixed with the tahor chulin that it's not nullified? Why shouldn't it be nullified? After all, it's all dissolved. So Amar Rav Shisha, Rei de Rav Idi, Reisha Betuma. So now we're going to give 3 different answers to this question. And with that, we'll be finished for today. So Amar Rav Shisha, Rei de Rav Idi, Reisha Betuma Mashkin de Rabbanan. So the first case that we're talking about isn't a case of biblical tuma, it's a case of rabbinic tuma, where it was just a tuma that as a result of coming into contact with a liquid. So seifa deoraisa, and the seifa, it's talking about biblical tuma, and as a result, when you have the case of biblical tuma, so then we will not have nullification despite the fact that the meat has fallen apart. But in the reisha where we're talking about rabbinic tuma, well, then we can have a situation where it is in fact nullified. So aval tumas sheretz mai, but in fact, in our first case, if we had actually had a tuma by connecting to a creepy crawly thing, well, then what would be the situation according to the Tana Kama? Lo tala, it wouldn't be nullified. Well, again, we have the same question that we asked early. Adatani seifa avachaticha shel chatas tahoros shenisarba b'mea chatichos shel chulin tahoros lo tala. Why did you need to tell me about the case of a chatas that's tahor mixing up with the slices of chulin that are tahor? Why did you tell me that case of not being nullified? Nifla v'litna. You could have talked about the same case, right? The same case of a tameh piece of meat of chatas mixed up with tahor pieces of meat of chatas, and just say that in the first case, it becomes nullified because we're talking about rabbinic tuma, and in the B'med Devarim Amurim, and what are we talking about? Betumas mashkin. That we're talking about rabbinic tuma. About betumas sheretz lo. But then say that if in fact it was the tuma of a bug, which is a biblical tuma, it wouldn't get nullified. Why didn't that brisa just teach that easier comparable case? Why did it jump to a new topic of the slice of chatas meat that is tahor mixed with 100 slices of chulin meat that are tahor? So again, as we answered before, tahora, the tahoras adiflay. Again, as Rashi explained before, that when you have a mixture of tahor and tahor, well, that is the most likely situation to have nullification. And yet, in this instance, we don't have nullification. And so as a result, the Gemara, the Brisa is going out of its way to give us a case of tahor with tahor to tell us that in particular, this case is not a case of nullification. That is answer number one to the question of what's the difference? Why is it that Reish Lakish would say that the initial case of the meat that fell apart is nullified, whereas the meat that fell apart when you had, the meat that fell apart when you have tamei chatas with tahor chatas, it is nullified. But when you had meat that fell apart with tahor chatas with tahor chulin, meaning things that anybody could eat, we said that it was not nullified. So answer number one is to say the first one is talking about a tuma that is rabbinic, and the second case where we don't say nullification is talking about where we have tuma that is biblical. Rabba offers another explanation. Rabba amar reisha iser lav, seifa iser kares. No, the first case is dealing with a prohibition that is just a lav. It is just a negative commandment to have if you end up eating the tamei chatas. But seifa iser kares. But the latter part is dealing with something where the prohibition would end up being if you're eating the thing that you're not supposed to, the meaning a non-kohen is eating this piece of tar chatas meat, that is a prohibition of kares. And so as a result, that's why we're going to differentiate between the nullification in the first case. We'll allow nullification when the prohibition is just a lav, but we won't allow nullification when the prohibition is a more serious prohibition that is punishable with kares. One second, but Rabba is the one who said kol b'deoraisa loshna iser lav loshna iser kares. When it comes to a biblical prohibition, we don't differentiate between a regular lav and something that is punishable by kares. So Kashya, yeah, it's difficult to explain that Rabba would say that this answer would apply for Rabba because he generally does not differentiate. Again, it's not a total upshug, but we're going to say that we'll prefer a different answer. So answer number three, Rav Ashi Amar Seifa Mishum Dahabi Le Davar Sheyesh Lo Matirin. Now look, the end of our Mishnah, the end of this brisa, is talking about something that has a permitted aspect to it, meaning that it is something that can become permitted. We call davar sheyesh lo matirin afilu be'elef lo batal. And this is another of the principles associated with nullification. This is one of the main Gemaras that teach us the rules associated with nullification. It's one of the main Gemaras that you learn as a rabbinic student about when you learn about mixtures of kosher and non-kosher things and how we deal with them from a halachic standpoint. So this rule says that if in fact you have something that is going to become permitted, that in that case, then even if it is mixed with numerous other things, it can never, even 1,000 of them, it can never be nullified. But now the Gemara is going to reject Rav Ashi, because is this really a case of something that can become permitted? V'hada Rav Ashi bedusahi. This is really false, what Rav Ashi says, because Laman, who are we talking about in terms of eating this mixture? Ila Kohen Mishri Shari. If you're asking about a Kohen eating it, this mixture of tahor chatas meat with tahor chulin meat, it's all permitted. He can eat it now. Ila Yisrael, and if you're talking about for a Yisrael, la'olam asur, it is always prohibited to him. So Elahad, the Rav Ashi Bedusahi. So actually, what Rav Ashi has said is not actually this case. This case is not, in fact, the case of Davar Sheyesh Lo Matirin. It is actually mutter. Now that could still be a reason to say that that's why we're not going to allow nullification, but the reasoning of Rav Ashi does not apply. So, all right, so now what have we done? So let's just go back and just give us a framework. We have a machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Do we allow the wife of an androgynous to eat only truma, or is it also chazav v'shok, or is she allowed to also eat the meat of a korban if she was married to an androgynous? Reish Lakish says no. Rabbi Yochanan says yes. And we saw that the machlokas between them actually has several different parts. First, Reish Lakish says that truma today is all rabbinic, whereas Rabbi Yochanan says no, truma today is also biblical. And again, there's the concept of whether or not the shok and the chazeon shok are potentially included, because Rabbi Yochanan says that truma is biblical. Well, then he also is going to allow the chazeon shok to be eaten by the wife of the androgynous, whereas Reish Lakish says no. And then we saw that all of this is also tied to a machlokas about bittul, about nullification. And Reish Lakish says that all you need to eliminate the possibility of nullification is something that is sometimes counted, whereas Rabbi Yochanan says that no, you need things to be always counted in order for them to no longer be potentially nullified. And so we're now going to continue, God willing, over the weekend with understanding Rabbi Yochanan, and specifically, is it really true that Rabbi Yochanan says that truma today is a biblical requirement? For that, you'll stay tuned, God willing, on Sunday, and we'll pick up with the Sava Rabbi Yochanan, truma bisman hazeh d'oraisa, God willing, then.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Have a wonderful, wonderful Shabbos, and look forward to continuing our learning together.
You're not able to teach on Shabbos, huh?
No, I'm away for this Shabbos.
Okay, enjoy.
Thank you so much. You have a good Shabbos as well.
Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh Tov.